Peter is worthy, and so done, by Anonymous. Chapter 1. The first time it happened, he didn't exactly have an audience for it, save for Friday, who later showed the video to Tony, who then gleefully shared it with the rest of the Avengers. By now it was common knowledge that only Thor could lift his hammer, since one had to be worthy of it. In Peter's defence, his time, and head, was so full of everything from Spider-Man to school to any odd jobs he could find, injuries, new suits and inventions, research, his complete lack of personal life. The point was, he was busy and poor, trying to balance it all and failing. It was a wonder he still found the time to eat and sleep. There was no time for some irrelevant gossip if it didn't involve him. Then, somehow, he gained the interest of one Tony Stark. Not as Spider-Man, but as boring and perfectly normal Peter Parker. It made life a little easier, but even though Stark paid his interns, and it came with other benefits, Peter worried that the man would start questioning the amount of food his totally normal intern could eat during lunch breaks. He still had to do some odd jobs now and then when money got tight. Taking care of Aunt May and his own life, never mind his alter ego, added up faster than he could begin saving for rainy days. He had a lot of rainy days. There was no letting down his guard even as Peter, when Stark, once he found something that interested him, was greedy to know and have it all. He also had no idea that his almost 18-year-old intern was Spider-Man. Peter wasn't exactly in a hurry to reveal that little detail to the man, who still hadn't forgiven Spider-Man for dropping bird poop on Iron Man's shiny shoulder. Don't ask. All you had to know was that insults were thrown way before poop was. Never meet your heroes. One of the benefits of being an intern at Stark Industries was a personal lab, if you were either high on the food chain or Tony Stark liked you. Ironically, he likes Peter, which meant Peter had his own little lab, one that he made sure to keep sparkling clean. Sure, he'd make things explode now and then, as was the way, but he always made sure the lab was cleaned afterwards. It was also to mess with Stark, who had been weirded out the first time he entered the newly cleaned lab. The experiment had gone boom all over the room, stuck like a glue, or a web, where he could see his reflection on every surface, highlighting the haggard look that came from no sleep or shower for days. So Peter was busy and kind of tired of it too, like, can't a guy get a moment to breathe, or was it really too much to ask? When he entered the lab, already on a short fuse after last night of a truly miserable patrol, he found the room covered in trash, a full cake thrown against the wall, a few party hats and confetti, among other mystery items all over the place, and his favourite chair broken. His already dark mood went down the drain faster than one could flush the toilet. "Calm, deep breaths, Parker," he muttered, letting go of the glass wall meant to withstand the worst explosions, just as it began to crack under his hand. After a minute or a few, just staring in despair, he kicked his way through the mess, muttering insults under his breath. He was glad, however, that to take out the trash he didn't need to leave the room, thanks to the chute, where he tossed everything as he cleaned. It would take everything to wherever the trash went, which included a hammer that looked much heavier than it was. The ridiculous size of the thing was the first clue that it was probably one of those cheap party toys or something. Not that he looked too closely, he just wanted it all gone. Everything that didn't belong. If anything was important, oh well, Stark could fire him for all he cared, which right now he didn't. That was when Stark's AI finally intervened. "Mr. Parker," Friday started. "Really not in the mood, Fry," Peter snapped, and tossed the hammer into the chute, where it went with great noise and much damage, and left the lab in search of a mop and something to sanitize the place with. "I'll booby-trap my lab, I swear. That'll show them." When he later loudly complained to Stark that he couldn't do any real research in a lab that wasn't treated as such, the man seemed almost too happy when he promised it wouldn't happen again, all while staring at him like he'd discovered a new favourite toy to chew on. Chapter 2. Anyone who claimed the Avengers didn't know how to hold a grudge, the petty kind, had never met them. For numerous times, each and every one of them, even Natasha, when nobody was looking, had tried to lift Thor's hammer. It was all good fun where nobody's feelings got hurt. They were all equally unworthy and had made their peace with it. Until now. How could it be that none of the heroes could move it, but some skinny nerd, a kid, did it so effortlessly? "No offence," Clint had said. To which Tony replied, "I am taking full offence." For all they knew, the hammer had been fake, the whole thing orchestrated to make them look stupid for Tony's amusement. So it was. When they couldn't seem to come to a peaceful agreement over the issue, they agreed it had to be done again, just to make sure. This time under their watchful eyes and Thor's solemn promise, on his honour, that it was indeed his hammer. The next time it happened, almost a week later, Peter was in a much better mood, which didn't mean he was happy and not willing to strangle someone with the stupid decorations currently in his possession. He had to admit that Stark interns didn't do the usual fetching coffee for the boss or other such boring nonsense, so perhaps he was a little spoiled. Still, he had another version of the new web formula brewing, which had to be monitored at all times, highly volatile new recipe that it was, so he figured he deserved to feel some annoyance over this. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I signed up to be his errand boy, certainly not his interior decorator. He should first pay me more. He's a billionaire, while I'm the poor, barely getting by starving orphan and a half. He shouldn't feel bad about himself. You didn't, Friday agreed. He should. Then why, Peter complained as he dropped the box of decorations on the floor, staring at the bizarre location where hardly anyone would find themselves in, unless they got lost. Why am I doing this? Where am I? Are you sure I'm in the right place? Yes. You're ignoring my first question, aren't you? Friday didn't answer, which couldn't be a good sign. Peter stared at the open box where he could clearly see the red and gold decorations and even a smaller full box of ridiculously big nails, but nothing else. How am I going to do this? With magic? There is a hammer you may use, Friday helpfully pointed out. That's when he spotted the hammer, which looked vaguely familiar, but he was more thrown by the randomness of it all. A big-ass hammer that was just sitting there on the floor, almost as though someone had left it there on purpose. Seriously? Right, this isn't at all suspicious. Suspicious or not, he didn't have the time to figure out life's odd little mysteries when he was in danger of causing another explosion. At this rate, he would soon have to start explaining what he was doing. Answers he didn't have, about a strange-looking sticky white fluid all over the place. Peter shuddered at the mental image of explaining that to Stark, or worse, someone like Pepper Potts. When he picked it up, the hammer was quite light, and he was worried it wouldn't last through the first nail. To his surprise, it did, all 7 of them. Too distracted to wonder about the sparks that came every time the hammer hit a nail, Peter only worried about the sudden thundering that was coming a little too close. Of course the weather is going to turn bad when I'm close to getting home. Typical Parker luck, he muttered bitterly as he hit the 6th nail, maybe a little too angrily. This time the whole tower shook. Friday sounded hesitant when she said, "Perhaps..." She never got the chance. While hammering at the nail number 7, the tower shook again, and then there came a heavy crash as the vent close to Peter's head fell open, spitting out Natasha and Clint. Peter stared, unsure how he was meant to react. A screaming fanboy? Sadly, he was way past the hero worship, after having gotten to know the Avengers a little too well for his comfort. But they didn't know that. Should he play it cool? Black Widow and Hawkeye, he finally croaked. Peter Parker, Natasha said, looking as though she hadn't been caught spying and crawling in the vents. Nat, Clint wheezed out, you're crushing something important. I'm begging you. Natasha huffed and rose to her feet, gracefully, unlike Clint's undignified wobbling. She glanced at Peter's hands, nodded her approval, and dragged her protesting partner out of the room. Approval for what? Peter wondered, staring in confusion at the closed door. He was reaching for nail number 8 when Stark burst into the room, screaming, "Parker!" Peter froze, expecting to hear a lecture of some kind. Had something gone badly wrong with his experiment? Was he fired? Had Stark figured out he was Spider-Man? Wait, Why was he followed by Captain America and Thor, who was grinning from ear to ear? Why were all the Avengers here? "You're all here," he said dumbly. Contrary to popular belief, that was rarely the case. When the Avengers didn't work together, they usually had their own missions or a life to live. Is something wrong? Was this something Spider-Man needed to know about? "No, everything's fine. Great, wonderful, perfect. I changed my mind," Stark said, looking pale, but maybe Peter was imagining it. The man was many things, but looking so openly horrified as he now did wasn't one of them. "Changed your mind?" "Yes," Stark said with heavy emphasis. "You can get back to whatever you were doing before, or go home. I'll finish this." All too happy to obey, instead of getting annoyed, Peter didn't question it. He was well on his way out when Stark stopped him again. "Wait, hammer, leave the hammer." Getting tired of feeling confused, Peter looked from Stark to the others, all staring at him in a manner that made him want to crawl somewhere small, dark and high, until he remembered the hammer. He'd forgotten all about it. "Oh, right, sorry." He left it in Thor's waiting hands. That gave him a pause and a nagging feeling at the back of his head, and left in a hurry, the tower suddenly feeling too small. "He is worthy," Thor boomed proudly, and the tower shook once more. Tony spent the remaining week bemoaning over the damage done to his wall, and trying and failing to remove the nails from it, and making sure his tower wasn't in danger of collapsing. Chapter 3. As a child, Peter used to dream about getting to know Tony Stark, and imagined what it would be like to work with the man in his super-duper cool lab. He painted it in his head, a picture, made with childishly bright crayons, bigger than life itself. Well, while the man was a hero indeed, he was nothing like his childish imagination had made him. None of the Avengers were, which was a story for another time. Aunt May had wisely said that perhaps he could get to know this Tony Stark, and maybe he would learn to like him, flaws and all. Peter wasn't so sure of it, but May was rarely wrong, which was the only reason why he hadn't gone swinging for the hills when he first met the man behind the mask and glamour. Maybe someday he would even agree to address him by his name, Tony, like he kept begging him to. For now, however, it would be Stark. You didn't insult his supersuit, spandex or not, and get away with it. At least his look wasn't a tin can. To think that he used to be a big fan. Yeah, his feelings were hurt when his longtime hero had mocked his suit. And yet, seeing a hero turned human wasn't entirely bad. After the last incident, it was decided they wouldn't test the worthiness of the intern anytime soon. Big tower that it was, there were people still making sure it was strong and secure as ever. The third time it happened, it was once again purely by accident, and only because Thor, for all that his hammer was special and so important, kept leaving it everywhere. So it was, while he was off gallivanting who knows where, Mjolnir was left behind. The Tony from before would be a little jealous of the grand adventures, which even a genius billionaire like himself could only dream of. But the slowly domesticated Tony was too busy trying to teach Dummy and you how to do a robot arm dance, with the help of some video he'd found on the internet. He already had one bruise forming on his chin after the first attempt. That was the scene his intern walked in on, his boss and the robots moving around, making twitching, jerking motions. Are you alright? Should I call someone? Miss Potts? 911? The Avengers?" Peter sounded genuinely concerned, which was actually rather nice. Of course, that wasn't something Tony would admit out loud, just like he wouldn't admit that he had a favourite intern. "No." For a while the only sounds were made by Dummy and you, still trying to do the dance, and the faint sound of music coming from Tony's phone. Then, a soft rustling of papers and something being moved. He'd never noticed it until now, but he didn't think he'd ever heard the footsteps when the kid moved around. For someone who was still growing, awkwardly gangly teen, it was rather odd. "I'm having a serious case of second-hand embarrassment right now. Is this what it feels like watching an old person trying to be cool and hip?" Peter questioned, with obvious air quotes thrown in. "Hey," Tony protested and finally looked up, narrowing his eyes at the bright amusement of a fresh youth. Was this what he used to look like as a kid, looking at all the old people down his nose as boring and, well, old? I'm not old, everyone just looks old to you because you're still an infant. Is there an actual reason for this? What is this anyway? An experiment or exorcism? Sure there is. I'm teaching them to move something, control. Tony waved his hand. It's very important top secret Avengers stuff which a child wouldn't understand. Go away. Anyway, I was on my way home when Miss Potts made me to be her messenger. Some contract or something that you have to sign by tomorrow morning. Or else. I'm guessing that means you'll be in trouble. Tony was already tuning it out. Yeah, I'll look at it later. I'm busy now. I'm serious, Tony. She looked like she'd be having my head too if I didn't get you to look at it. It was honestly kind of scary. I'm just a lowly intern. Don't make me the messenger just to let me suffer. I'm too young to die. Tony stared at him, and slowly a smile began to form. Yeah. Is that all you can say? Yes. Peter looked around, wearing that same look he always did when he entered Tony's domain, obviously uncomfortable, which was insulting. He should be honoured to be there. In all the years, only a handful of people had been there, and even less were allowed repeat visits. Anyway, I'm off now. Don't forget the contract Miss Potts told you to sign, he reminded on his way out. The papers are on the desk under a hammer, so you can't miss it this time. See ya. Tony rolled his eyes like the child he was when it came to adulting. Yeah. Wait. He almost considered calling after Peter. Then he paused to consider the gift that had just presented itself at him, and grinned. Well, now I really can't look at them. What a shame. He made a half-hearted attempt at moving the hammer, then the papers. Friday, make sure she knows I tried, but I am just not worthy enough to move this stupid hammer, he said lovingly. Right then he loved both the kid and the hammer. Friday sounded almost dry when she replied. Yes, boss. Oh, and please tell me I wasn't hearing things. He did call me Tony, didn't he? He did. Awesome. Save the footage. Now what to do with my sudden freedom? Tony restarted the video and made another attempt at the dance. Tony's joy was short-lived. Pepper had copies made of the contract. Chapter 4. Eventually, even the slowest must begin to catch up on things. Maybe not immediately, and maybe not everything, but enough. The fourth time it happened, the very next day, Peter was familiar enough with the peculiar-looking hammer to recognise it as the one he'd used before, twice. He still had no memory of the first time. He was bored. His new formula was going through a third attempt, and all he could do was wait until it was finished. He didn't wish to start on any new projects at this time, or he would be too tempted to stay overnight, which was not an option. New York needed Spider-Man. Tony Stark had run off somewhere, ordering him to stay, like one would order a puppy who was still learning. Peter had scoffed at it internally. A puppy he was not. You didn't tell a spider to do or not do something. A spider did what a spider could and wanted to, thank you very much. So he was feeling a little rebellious sitting in Stark's lab, which was the man's own fault for not revoking his access before leaving, right after he'd promised to show him the newest Iron Man suit. Okay, so maybe he was still a fan of the suits, just a little. It would have really made his day to be shown how they were made by the man himself, but instead, here he was, balancing the hammer on his forehead, handle first, bored out of his mind. How's it doing? Your web fluid shows no sign of volatility at this time. It looks quite stable. By my calculations, you have finally succeeded. Congratulations. Fry, Peter hissed, glancing around frantically and making cutting gestures. The hammer fell with a big bang, which he ignored. Secret identity. My apologies. I didn't realise you were attempting to keep it a secret. Peter paused. Are you actually... You're laughing at me, aren't you? You sound like you're smiling. Of course not. You wouldn't be making fully recognisable webs in a lab of Tony Stark, whose AI is watching your every move, if you were trying to keep your secret identity to yourself. Peter grimaced. I deserved that. In my defence, it's a lot easier making web fluid in an actual lab. Never mind trying to experiment with it. Also, Aunt May has been getting a little too interested in my personal life lately. Something about how I'm not home enough, and when I am, I'm covered in bruises and whatnot. I think she's worried I'm getting beat up at school or using drugs, because she's been sneaking these pamphlets into my bag. Is she not aware of your status as Spider-Man? No, Peter scoffed. I mean, can you imagine if she ever found out? I'd be in so much trouble, you have no idea. She's horrifyingly creative with punishments. Ben was much more straightforward. He reminisces with sadness, then side-eyed the ceiling. How long have you known? Since your first day in the lab, when you were sewing the bullet hole in your suit. Friday sounded reproachful. Peter hung his head in shame. Does Tony know? He asked nervously, already planning his escape. The tower wasn't really that high if he had to throw himself out the window, was it? If nothing else, he could finally put his healing factor into a full test. What's a few broken bones or spine or neck, anyway? He does not. He doesn't? Peter was more than a little surprised. He frowned at the ceiling. How come? He never asked. Peter's eyes went wide with wonder. Friday, you sneaky, clever... Wait, but shouldn't you have to, or want to, tell the man who's your creator? He likes that I have free will, as much as possible. And of course it would backfire eventually, Peter muttered. Could you, keep this from him still? Because that would be awesome. Of course, Peter, Friday agreed warmly. Oh, she liked him. Peter cheered inwardly and smiled. You're the best. Now, if I may suggest a few improvements for your web fluid. Fire away. As he carefully listened to her suggestions, which he was sure to try out later, Peter resumed his balancing act with the hammer, moving around gracefully, never hitting anything even when his eyes were fixed firmly on the hammer. It was all going so well until the appearance of Dummy and Yu, who was still attempting to learn the dance. Friday paused, but all she had time to say was, Peter, when it all went terribly wrong. Peter, for all that his spider sense had warned him of many dangers, didn't count the robots as such. And so it was, while Peter was still putting all his focus into balancing the hammer and listening to Friday, and planning his next web improvements, was pushed hard by Dummy, who was having the hardest time mastering the fine art of dancing. Peter fell and the hammer went flying, right where the brand new iron suit stood, waiting for the finishing touches. Oh shit. There was a total silence as they all stared at the carnage, the iron suit down for the count with a massive crater at the centre of it, where the hammer smashed. Even in the midst of his horror, Peter couldn't help but marvel how such a light hammer, a hammer, was capable of causing such damage. Apparently, even after all this time, he still couldn't quite control his own strength. Suddenly, finally, his spider sense came alive as his hearing picked up the familiar footsteps just as Friday warned. Boss is on his way. Peter and the robots, who were now making sounds of distress, glanced at one another. Run, Peter told them as he slid across the floor in his rush to be gone. Take the hammer, Friday instructed him. Peter didn't even question it, and he snatched it on his way out, running like his life depended on it. Dummy and Yu followed at a much more sedate pace. When Tony entered his lab, he stared at the destruction in tired confusion. Did I do that? I haven't been awake that long yet. You haven't slept for the past 49 hours, Friday offered helpfully. Huh. Tony shook his head. Well, better clean it up before Pepper sees it, so she can say, I told you so. He sighed. Where are the two dumbasses when I need them? Dummy and you are helping Mr. Parker with an experiment in his lab. Huh. Well, it's his funeral. Tony never did find out the truth behind the destruction. Chapter 5. The fifth time it happened, enough time had passed to allow Tony to forget all about the near collapse of his tower. So a few weeks later he had Thor move the hammer into Peter's workspace, placing it on the desk along with a full cake, hoping to jog the kid's memory of it. His more sensible friends, even Friday, had tried to warn him it would be a bad idea to keep tempting the fate. One of these days he would probably learn to listen to them. Yeah, not likely. When Peter entered his lab that day, his eyes shot immediately to the hammer. Tony, had he given it more thought, would have realised that the red creeping across the kid's face, much like Hulk's green, wasn't from embarrassment or other harmless emotion. He was hiding behind some lab equipment, grinning excitedly, ready to catch him lifting the hammer and then immediately go with a "gotcha" as he once and for all explained what it meant. Maybe even see if Thor was still around for a meet and greet. He had not foreseen Peter grabbing the hammer in anger and yelling, "My notes! I spent all night writing them down, by hand, because you were doing maintenance on Friday. Stark!" And Peter turned around, marching straight toward Tony's hiding place, shaking in his hand pieces of paper that looked crumbled and... they had burn marks on them? Oh no. Tony backed away. "I can explain," he tried nervously. Now was the time to lay down all his cards. "See, Thor's hammer..." He was interrupted, rather rudely too, in his opinion. "Oh, you can explain. You know I'm sick of this hammer being everywhere I go," Peter seethed, too upset and looking oddly familiar. He looked much like the face in Tony's mirror after a few too many all-nighters. Oh no. Tony began to realise he was trying to reason with a sleep-deprived teenager whose mood was probably powered by hormones. "And now I'm going to have to do it all over again," Peter deflated suddenly, wavering in place. "Don't feel so good," he muttered. "Kid?" Tony reached out a hand in concern. Peter shook his head. "I'm going home. Here." He pushed the hammer into Tony's hand, which in response tightened around the hammer. "Wait!" Like a heavy rock, the hammer smacked right on the floor, nearly pulling his arm off. Tony gasped and shot his eyes wide open, staring straight ahead, while his mind went blank at the sudden turn of events. Then he made a soft, high-pitched keening sound. Peter rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, I know you love to be dramatic, but that's just a hammer, one that's barely heavy enough to do more than maybe bruise a little." Tony simply stared, gesturing weakly at the hammer, at his toes, where the thing now rested. His look of pain turned into horror as the kid, still upset with his boss, turned around and left the room without a second glance. He had learned from the best. Despite how shaky he looked, his exit was almost as dramatic as Tony at his best and worst. If Tony hadn't been in too much pain, he would have been proud. "Wait, take the hammer." "Boss?" Friday said. "Shall I call Doctor..." "No, tell Thor to get here and get his stupid hammer off my stupid foot." Tony ended up with a cast on his foot, in Iron Man colours of course. He refused to speak to anyone about it, moping for days. He even tried the silent treatment with Peter, but as the kid was already giving him a silent treatment, the whole thing resulted in them talking to one another through Friday. Eventually, Tony forgot why he'd been so upset in the first place, and so he caved in first, begging for the kid to keep him company as he was bored, everyone else was busy, and he wanted to blow some stuff up. Peter agreed, but only after Tony promised to keep trash out of his lab, for real this time. Chapter 6. +1. It had been several months since the last incident with the hammer, and things had been back to normal, much to Peter's relief. Well, other than one minor incident with Tony trying to crash Peter's birthday party, looking prepared to turn the small event between a few friends into something loud and over the top. Everyone knew how Tony Stark used to party. Thank God for Gwen Stacy, who had opened the door. She'd given the man one unimpressed look and a simple "no," and slammed the door into his face. Tony wouldn't be Tony if he had given up that easily. He knocked again, this time with the excuse that he needed to use the bathroom. "Use the suit," she had said. It was one time. Why do people keep bringing it up? One time. The man later complained to Peter, but not without a grudging, "She kind of reminds me of Pepper. I like her." Honestly, Peter might have been in love with her, but there was no way he'd admit that to Tony, who had become too interested in his life, as the party had proved, and later the obnoxiously expensive car he'd received as a gift. Peter not only didn't know how to drive, he was so bad at it he'd made people cry. All in all, things had been as slow and normal as they could be when one was a superhero. But as it was, especially with the Parker luck, the lazy days couldn't last forever. They never did. The day was like any other Saturday, when Peter, now wearing the bright moniker known as Spider-Man, was swinging across his neighbourhood, blissfully unaware of the ongoing drama outside of it. So far, the patrol had started off good and slow. He'd helped an old lady cross the busy road, took pictures with a few tourists, chatted with New Yorkers, ate a few hot dogs, which a mother had bought for him after he'd saved her daughter's doll. He didn't get into any fights with New York pigeons, and people were waving at him and saying hello, instead of throwing things and wishing ill fate on his poor self. It was great. The day was sunny, and it gave extra swing to his swing. He just started to think of it as too slow and too boring when he really needed to stop jinxing things. A magnificent boom came from the other side of New York. It was the way out of his friendly hood, but come on, there was no way he could ignore that, and so he switched directions mid-swing. He found the Avengers, minus Thor, fighting against some lab experiment gone wrong, which made him feel grateful for his rare case of actual luck. Honestly, he felt sorry for the poor ugly things. All he got was a little bite, some horrific pain while he almost died, and cool powers. "Spider-Man, watch out!" Captain America's voice boomed across the burning street, just in time with his spider sense that flashed its own warning, barely avoiding collision with one of the creatures, which apparently could fly on top of spitting out some fire. Peter changed his mind. He wasn't sorry enough not to bite back when bitten. Once had been enough. Sticking against a building, he switched his usual webs to the new formula that had given him so much grief. It was time to put it into the test. It was, however, going to be a little impractical, he realised it now, but that was a problem to be solved some other day. Flinging the first web, he watched as it caught the nearest creatures, stunning them and others that came too close. Yet there were still slight kinks with his new taser webs, but that had to do for now. So zapping he went, paralysing those creatures as fast as he could, buying the Avengers more time to fight against the overwhelmingly huge army of them. He frowned as he wondered whether he'd be of more use lower to the ground, where most of the creatures remained. He really should have done proper testing before taking his new toy out into the first battle. As he switched back to his regular webs, he leaped off the wall, did the most beautiful twirl in the air, shot his webs, and nothing. He'd zapped his web shooters, and now they were useless. They were still outnumbered, and he was falling from great heights. Everyone else was too far. Nobody would be able to save him. This was it. He was going to die, or truly put his healing factor to the test. There was a blur of something flying past Peter. He didn't even think as his hand reached out and took hold of it, and then he was flying. No, it was more like he was pulled with the thing, simply going along with the unexpected ride. He was dizzy with relief when his feet finally touched the ground, and he found himself at a suspiciously perfect location, seeing a huge group of creatures in a neat bundle if he'd used his web shooters. Of course, he could use his fists, which wasn't his favourite thing to do. But Peter's eyes fell on the thing in his hand, and he groaned. The hammer again! Who died and cursed him? A shout of warning and a smack of bodies thrown against the wall, barely avoiding being burned to death, caught his attention. So far, he was the only one who didn't look tired. Well, Hulk was having the time of his life, smashing his massive hands around, but even he couldn't get them all in one go. The Avengers didn't look beaten to hell, but they did look like they'd been going at this for much too long, without a single breath to be taken in between. Even Iron Man's usually so powerful shots looked as though not everything worked as they should. Yet there really was no question what his next move had to be. Anything could be turned into a weapon, and Peter didn't hesitate as he threw the hammer at the swarming creatures, his strength giving it more speed and power than he'd anticipated. The hammer flew in a perfect curve, hitting most of the enemies that happened to be on its radar in one go, and then it returned to Peter's hand that was still out, not because he'd been prepared for it. Frozen in place, he was looking straight into the eyes of smiling Thor, who didn't have his usual hammer, which... Peter's eyes slowly moved to the hammer in his hand. Didn't he use this hammer when Tony ordered him to hang some decorations? Used it as a literal toy at one point. Dropped it on Tony's toes. The iron suit. It was with mounting horror that Peter recalled every moment he'd used it as no less than a common object, until finally it clicked. As per the Parker luck, it did always get worse. He'd thrown Thor's hammer into a literal trash. "I am so sorry, Mr. Thor, ma'am, man, sir," he was babbling in panic, wondering if now was the moment he was going to die, while the world around him shook violently, not realising that it was Thor, laughing and slapping his back cheerfully. "He is worthy!" "That's great and all," Clint jogged past them to stab one of the creatures in the eye with his broken arrow. "But we still have a whole horde of them, and..." He stabbed again when the thing refused to die so easily. "In case you haven't noticed, we're running out of fuel." He kept stabbing until finally it was a goner. "A little help would be good." Thor slapped Peter on the back once more and took his hammer from Peter's lax hand. "Let us go to the battle, my friend." "Yeah, to the battle," Peter agreed weakly as he stared after Thor's mighty frame, preparing itself into the battle, with his mighty hammer that no longer looked like a toy or trash. This could not get any worse. He really wished the ground would open up and swallow him up. "Spider-Man," Captain America boomed. "We need your help, now," he ordered. Peter shook his head. "Okay, help, I can help." He pushed his horror mixed with embarrassment to be dealt with later and joined the fight. The battle lasted nearly all day, and yet nobody thought to send help. The cops, fair enough, since this was probably way above anything they could handle. But gee, thank you so much, secret agencies with their own even more secret superpowered allies and weapons, and other vigilantes, because apparently Peter was the only idiot to run to wherever the booms went off and screaming happened. Well, to be fair, Daredevil was still recovering from his latest ordeal. Who knew about the others, since it was hard to get close to them when they were all stupidly territorial, himself included. "What made you come up with that?" Iron Man's robotic voice sounded curious, breaking Peter from the depressing road his mind had taken him. "Those webs." Peter flashed back to his last major battle, where he'd lost. It had made him look so uncool. Genius," he waved a hand. "Easy peasy." There was a snort. "I can respect pride in one's work, I'm the last person to sneer at it. But seriously, I was already impressed by your usual webs. What else have you made?" He sounded almost like, "Huh, would you look at that? Iron Man liked something about Spider-Man." Peter preened, too blissful to care about the other tired, amused Avengers. "I mean, I did have some help. Friday gave some good advice on how to make the things more accurate when shooting at the target, but yeah, other than that, it's all me." He was startled by the heavy silence that followed. "Friday." Iron Man sounded the most robotic it ever had. Oh right. Spider-Man had never been in the tower. Never had Peter been so glad to be wearing a mask. He could feel his face go from white to red to white again, so fast it left him feeling faint. Yeah, he said, and winced at how high and squeaky his voice sounded, so he lowered it. "I have this friend, it's his nickname, like that guy Friday from Robinson Crusoe books. That guy Friday." That had been way too close, but thankfully they still made them read old books at school, which was now saving his ass. or not. It was silent as they stared at him. Iron Man's faceplate retracted to reveal the grimy face of Tony, gaping like a fish, trying to find the words and failing. Thor was grinning so widely and looking so delighted, as only he could, which no one else would, had they been in his position. After all, it was his hammer that had been treated like literal garbage. Somebody, sounding totally innocent, said, "It's funny. We now know 2 people who, beside Thor, can lift the hammer. 2 young people, both male, same height, possibly the same body type, familiar voices, one of which takes the pictures of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle, and yet they're never seen together. What a coincidence." It was Natasha. Of course it was. Spider-Man's mask looked perfectly blank, while Peter tried desperately to come up with an explanation. There was a silence while they all waited, until it was broken by Tony's, "No, you can't be the same person." "Why not?" Peter, the dumbass Parker, asked dumbly. Natasha looked at him with fond amusement. "Kid, that's so embarrassing," Clint said. Thor was still grinning, while Hulk stomped around impatiently, chasing away any curious onlookers with his mere presence. You're actually..." Tony stammered in disbelief. "But Peter is great, while you're spandex swinging..." He made a gesture of shooting a web. "The webs that only a genius could have made." Of course, that was when he suddenly remembered. "You little shit. You threw bird shit on me. I'm your boss. The mentor you look up to." Peter groaned. "It was last year. Let it go. And who says I look up to you?" He winced, and then with a lower voice he added, "I mean, Peter told me he can't stand you. You're terrible and your suits are ugly." Tony's face twisted. "It is you. My own intern. The fruit of my loins." Yeah, that was a massive nope. Please don't ever call me that. Under the intense, knowing gazes of the Avengers surrounding him, Peter finally deflated. "Fine, you won." He started to remove his mask when a massive hand slammed at his head. Things went a little fuzzy then. "No!" Hulk growled. "Son, we're still out in the open. Anyone could see you," Captain America admonished him, using his "my word is law" tone of voice. The others were either nodding in their agreement or saying something. Well, Tony was still huffing about the betrayal, but Peter wasn't exactly paying any attention. Once the hand was gone, Peter kept his eyes down, because that's all he could do just then. "I think I just lost a few inches." He carefully pointed at his neck, or spine, or both. The others were immediately alarmed and crowded him, asking questions like Clint's, "Can you feel your feet?" "I'm still standing," Peter said through his teeth, while Thor was slapping his back again. "Man of spiders is worthy indeed. What a joyful day it is. I declare a feast to be held in his honour." "Thor, buddy, you're breaking my intern," Tony warned him, sounding almost concerned. "Nonsense, he has wielded the mighty Mjolnir and defeated the enemy. Man of spiders is made of iron, but as your heir he must be." "Wait, no, that was a joke," Tony tried. There were some more words shared then, but Peter didn't hear the rest of it, as by then he was unconscious. He finally figured it out, why not many vigilantes worked with others. Who needed enemies with friends and allies like his? He loved his healing factor, was the first wonderful fuzzy thought, as Peter woke in his pleasantly comfortable hospital bed, which could only mean he was in the Avengers Tower. And he was even more thankful for whatever they'd given him for the pain, because this was some good stuff. He'd ask later where they got the goodies, because sign him up years ago, but for now he'd just enjoy the rare floaty feeling. It was possible they dosed him up too much, since there was no way they could have known just how fast and far his healing went. His neck and spine no longer felt like they'd been shattered. His legs, while tingly, also felt strong as always. Seeking them out, his hearing picked up on the Avengers, arguing over cereal. Natasha won, the sneaky spy that she was. Clint claimed the unfair abuse of a poor man who was hard of hearing, which earned him a spoon right in the middle of his forehead. And who knew that Captain America could sound so petulant over cereal? Thor was demanding a feast. Somebody was drowning in guilt and declined the offer of the stolen cereal. One of the voices was missing, but then there was movement on his right side, and Peter turned his, both so heavy and floaty, head to look at the man sitting there. "Mr. Sony Tark," he slurred. "How good to see you again, man." Tony hummed, looking at him thoughtfully. "I have so many questions, but I have a feeling that's going to have to wait. You're high." "So high," Peter agreed. "I like your ugly suits. They're flashy and not ugly at all." "I know you do. Other than myself, no one else drools over my suits and science the way you do. You're a proper nerd. The only kind of kid I can tolerate." Tony sounded all fond, like marshmallowy. Peter's addled mind found that much more pleasant face to look at. It also made him feel bad. "I'm sorry about the bird poop. You hurt my suit, so I had to hurt yours." He glanced at Tony, hopefully. "Are you mad? You get it though, right? You wouldn't like it if somebody called your suit rude names." Tony snorted. "No, I'm not mad. Anymore." "Awesome. Then we can be friends." Peter giggled as he remembered something horrifying. "I've been using Thor's big hammer all wrong." There was a silence, and then Tony's pained, "Please never say that again. Not for another 10 years at least." Peter, still giggling, looked Tony straight in the eyes. "I threw Thor's big hammer in the trash. I want to die." "Don't we all?" Tony muttered. Suddenly, Peter froze, staring with utter confusion. "You have a beard?" It would be a lie to say Peter was comfortable with more people knowing his secret identity, even or especially people like the Avengers. From his experience, nothing good ever did come out when somebody found out the truth. But it would also be a lie to say he didn't feel at least a little relieved, with less of a heavy burden on his shoulders, now that they knew. Sure, there was some frowning and mumbling once they did the math and realised he'd been 15 when he first started the gig. But, as he'd happily pointed out, he was now 18, the bare minimum age of an adult. There was still some mumbling about that. One day he would tell them about his super hearing, but they let it go, for now. They finally gave Peter a detailed explanation of what being able to lift the hammer meant, in both good and bad. Being deemed worthy. That made Peter pale and feel rather faint, looking back on how he'd treated the hammer known as Mjolnir, even if Thor didn't seem to take any offence. Even after the Avengers amused themselves by watching all 4 videos of Peter using the hammer, Thor was laughing the loudest of them all. Peter wisely kept his mouth firmly shut about that one incident they didn't know about, but when he made the mistake of looking at Thor, who gave him a knowing wink, Peter's horror grew along with Thor's smile. He knew. Thor never revealed the truth to the others, and later he made a solemn promise that he never would. He also promised to one day show Peter his home. Peter may have discovered his new favourite among the Avengers. And yes, they did have a big feast, as per Thor's instructions. They had a good time eating and drinking, playing games, joking around, getting Peter to climb the walls and ceilings for their amusement, arm wrestling. It was the first time since the bite that Peter could reach the point where he was too full to eat. He also lost arm wrestling to Thor, but he did beat Captain America, much to Tony's delight and Steve's confusion. It was wonderful. Even a remorseful Bruce Banner had eventually joined them, who Peter hadn't met outside of the Hulk. It was almost the best day of his life, and he soaked in the team spirit. Well, he tried. Much to his dismay, even drunk, the Avengers didn't let him have any alcohol. No matter how much he swore, he couldn't even really get drunk. But later, after they had finally passed out, Friday allowed Peter to find and get a taste of the stuff Thor brought with him because, as Peter put it, it might be the only time he ever got the chance. Also, he was 18, not a child. But when he woke up the next morning wearing nothing but his Iron Man underwear, with the worst hangover known to mortal man, Peter swore off drinking. If there was one thing he could always count on, it was the Parker luck. Ever since then, Peter refused to touch the hammer. As was the nature of things among the Avengers, that didn't stop them from trying to trick him into it. Anyway, but that was a story for another time. The end. Chapter 7. Epilogue. Tony was in the middle of a video call with one Thaddeus Ross in his rarely used office, sitting behind his dusty desk, when he was so rudely interrupted. It was the strangest situation to find himself in. On the one hand, he was happy to end the call mid-rant. On the other hand, he was now staring at his should-be-in-prison wannabe rival, Justin Hammer, barging into his domain as though the squid owned the place. "Who let you out?" Hammer huffed. "I have connections." "You? Somehow I doubt that. How did you get in my tower? You're number 1 on my forever banned list. I even circled the name and picture with red." "Like I said, I have connections." "Right, something I'm going to have to look into. People to fire and possibly sue for everything they're not worth, and Friday to reprogram so that this doesn't happen again. Sorry, girl." "It is understandable," she answered. Hammer's face was taking on an interesting shade of red, but he only huffed and declared, "I have a business proposition." Tony stared, then he snorted. "You have a business proposition?" he wheezed, trying to control the laughter bubbling in his chest. "To me? You?" "Yes," Hammer hissed, looking rather flustered. "And if you would let me explain, you would be begging—" Tony laughed. "This is comedy gold." "Listen." Hammer never got to finish his sentence. Tony saw it all happen as though in slow motion. Hammer opened his mouth, then the door to the office slammed open, hitting Hammer, who let out a startled scream as he was sent flying, right into the perfectly located garbage chute that just so happened to open as he flew there head first, his scream echoing beautifully as he went down. The timing was too perfect, and Tony suspected Friday. Good girl. The chute closed silently, and Tony stared at it with wide eyes. Then he turned to look at his intern, who'd lately taken a habit of barging into places like he owned them. Tony was growing alarmingly fond of the kid. Peter looked confused and blinked owlishly. Was someone here, or... He looked haggard, and his lab coat was on backwards. Wearing big glasses over his baggy eyes only completed the look of a typical lab geek. He looked harmless. Looks could be deceiving. Tony's lips twitched and his breath hitched. "I knew it." Peter stared as Tony wiped away a tear. "What?" "You're worthy," Tony said as he sniffed. "And you're officially my favourite intern, and Spider-Man is my hero." "I think I need to redo my entrance," Peter finally said. "That would be great," Tony agreed with bright eyes. "Friday, please tell me you saved the footage." "I did," Friday said, and even she sounded cheerful. "Excellent." Peter shook his head as he slowly backed out of the room. "I'll come back later." Once he was alone with Friday, Tony sighed happily. "I love that kid. Remind me to get him something obnoxiously expensive. And Friday, good work with the shoot." "I aim to please, boss." All in all, it was a good day. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a lovely rest of your day.